Good afternoon, everybody. Glad you all could come today. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your Friday. I know that was hard to get everybody away. You know, it's hard to get out of the office. I appreciate you here. Personally, on Fridays, I always like to have an excuse to get out of the office, so just glad you're here. I want a number of things I want to deal with real quick before we have John and Jill come up. I am very thankful that Bob Goff is here. We are, the Quincy Journal is running this live, streaming live, and will be on the website. And so that'll be nice for anybody else who missed it or whatever, get a chance to see it. And I imagine you'll have it up there. Good. So we'll have it up, and which is really nice. And I want to thank John and Jill for being here. I know they have a really, really busy schedule, and there's just a lot of things going on in Springfield, but they took the time to come over, which is really nice, and gives us an opportunity to be able to talk with them. It's been a while. I think it's been a number of years since we've had both of you up here at the same time, and I just think it's really good that we can have that from time to time. And I know it's helpful to you guys also to be able just to hear from the average folks out here of some of the things we're dealing with. I am going to call Kim Mice to come up first, just to run us through a couple of things real quick, and then. But there are a lot of things, like I say, happening in Springfield. I want to thank Kim for being here. You know, NFIB, Illinois NFIB, really does a great job for the members here. And Kim every day is on the hill over there watching for us and just constantly sending us all the data we need. I try to filter it all of it back down to you. I know sometimes you get an awful lot of stuff in your emails, and so, you know, I hope you get a chance to read through those. But I know those reports that Kim sends us, those capital reviews and stuff, are really, really important for us because it does give us an idea of what's taking place, especially when General Assembly is in session, and it helps us. So I'm going to just have Kim come up real quick. She did bring some stuff for you to know about, and let her explain that.
Thanks, Mike. Again, my name is Kim Mice, and I'm the state director for the NFIB here in Illinois. I'm based in Springfield, and I'm your lobbyist. And I want to thank each of you for being a member of the NFIB. We're only a great organization because of people like you and the work that you do every day as small business owners, employing people, and when we ask you to, calling Jill, calling John, and letting them know when issues are important. And we have some issues coming up, perhaps as quickly as early November. We have a couple of prevailing wage issues that we're concerned about. And things that I talk about today, you're welcome to go to the NFIB website. It's all posted there. Those of you who are in the construction trades who do prevailing wage work, there's a bill coming up in early November that could greatly impact you and how you do business with local governments and school districts. So please take time to go to the website and look at that, or you can talk to me after this meeting. But also minimum wage. We have two proposals that are pending before the Illinois General Assembly right now that would raise Illinois' minimum wage significantly. One would catapult it to $10.60 by 2017, and the other one is pretty close to $10, $10.60, something like that. So those are two issues. We are also concerned about movements to take Illinois from a flat income tax to a progressive income tax. That is something that's also we think will be discussed in 2014. So I want to thank John and Jill for being here. They're both very good representatives, and I know they're always interested in hearing what each of you have to say on issues, and telling them how you feel and making sure that they understand how bills that they vote on impact your business is very, very important. So with that, I'll give it back to Mike. I do want to say we have two things up here. This is the latest Obamacare healthcare playbook. It's all a timeline, everything you need to know about Obamacare and how it's being rolled out and how you need to comply, because even though we don't like it, it's the law and you have to comply with it or be hit with penalties. So feel free to take one of these. And then we also have our most recent regulatory newsletter, which is from our federal folks in DC. So again, thank you all for being here.
I'd like to try to have this meeting today be somewhat casual. You know, I'd like us to have some dialogue back and forth. I want to call Senator Sullivan up. John, I want to have him come up first. John, if you could, in a snapshot for us, just sort of give us an idea of some of the things you're looking at and having to deal with in the Senate coming up maybe right now, some of the things that was in the veto session, some of the things you see that might affect us here in the near future.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be back, and it has been, I think Kim thought maybe, 2-3 years since we've gotten together like this in a group, but talked to many of you individually, so it's good to see you all. Am I on? I don't know if I need this anyway. I don't think I do. I'm going to set it down. Okay. All right. I do need it. We were in session 2 days this week for the fall veto session. We are not in next week, and then we're back the following week for 3 more scheduled days. Obviously the biggest issue hanging over us right now is the underfunding of our state's pension systems, the 5 retirement systems. It's facing $100 billion of underfunding. It's a result of obviously decades and decades of underfunding, so we worked very hard to try to find a solution. We have not done that yet. We've not come up with a solution we've been able to pass both the House and the Senate and then sent to the governor. There's 2 different proposals. The Senate passed Senate Bill 2404 last session, the end of May. It was a compromise proposal that saved about $60 billion over the course of the between now and 2045, which is the time frame that we're all working off of. That bill passed the Senate with bipartisan support. It had about 42 votes, I think, in the Senate. It's sitting in the House right now and has not been called for a vote, and I don't anticipate it being called for a vote. The Speaker doesn't think it goes far enough. The House, on the other hand, passed Senate Bill 1, which saves $160 billion over the same period of time. Obviously a much more aggressive piece of legislation with regard to the impact on both current state employees as well as retirees. That bill it passed the House with, I think, Jill, was it 62 votes, 61 or 2 votes? Does that sound right? It might have been 60, so kind of the bare minimum, but it did have bipartisan support, and it passed the House. It was called for a vote in the Senate, and it got 16 votes. It takes 30 votes to pass a bill, so there was very little support for it in the Senate. So since then, we adjourned the end of May, and after the adjournment, the governor called for a conference committee to be formed. So the conference committee is made up of 5 members of the House, 5 members of the Senate. They form a conference committee, and that committee's task is to find a compromise, if you will, or a proposal that will address the pension situation. Jill is on that conference committee, so I'm certainly going to let her speak more about what that role has been. But from talking to my colleagues in the Senate that are on that conference committee, they have tried to come up with a proposal somewhere in the middle. And they've made some progress on it, but they, as a conference committee, have not come up with an agreed to proposal. In other words, the conference committee will vote. It's a committee, and it will vote on a proposal hopefully at some point in time, and if it gets a majority, 6 votes or more, that would pass the conference committee. The thought is that legislation or that proposal then would be drafted into legislation, and the full House and the full Senate would vote on it. So that's kind of where we stand right now. It really kind of determines everything that we do in Springfield because of the impact that it has on our budget, the payment that we made this year into the 5 retirement systems. The annual payment this year was I think $6.2 billion. Last year that number was $5 billion. The year before that it was $4 billion. You can see how it's been going up dramatically. Now next year it doesn't go up as much. I think it's about a $200 million increase, that payment that will be due into the 5 systems. And some of you may have heard President Cullerton made the statement that it's not a crisis. You aware of that? Some of you heard that. I'm sure you did. What he was, and I'm not here to defend him, but what he was saying is that from the standpoint of the impact that it has on our budget, on our annual budget, the increase next year goes up $200 million. It's not a $1 billion increase like it was in this fiscal year, and $1 billion the year before. There was a payment schedule that was set into place back in 1995, an annual payment that we were going to make into the 5 retirement systems. We're still trying to adhere to that as much as we can. that payment schedule looks like this. If you looked at yearly, it was started out low and then it ramps up. Well, we're right here at the top of the ramp, and now it starts to kind of level off. So those increases aren't as dramatic as they had been for the last several years. So from the standpoint, it is a crisis. He did not imply or mean to imply that we don't have a crisis. We do. We have to address this situation. But the point he was trying to make is that the impact on the annual budget isn't as dramatic in this upcoming year as it has been, I should say. The other issue that we are going to be faced with is the income tax increase that was passed a couple years ago expires at the end of next year, 2014. It sunsets. And when it sunsets, it's estimated the state is going to lose approximately $5.4 billion in revenue. So we're trying to balance the budget right now with the revenues that we have. It's very difficult. I had a meeting last night in Jacksonville with the school board presidents and superintendents, 150 some people in attendance. Their question to me was, well, can we expect further cuts in education? And I said, well, here's the challenge that we have. We have our pension costs continuing to rise. We're going to see a $5.4 billion drop in revenue when the income tax sunsets. You do the math, right? I mean, that's what we're faced with. So we're going to have some very difficult decisions made over the course of the next year and future years to come. It's going to be interesting. Governor Quinn's going to have to introduce a budget next February. Next year's fiscal budget. By our Constitution, he's required to introduce a budget. So he can only do that budget based on the revenues that he knows that are currently in place. Well, the income tax sunsets December 31 of next year. So he's going to have a half a year's budget, a half a year of the revenue from the income tax that he can calculate into his budget, but the other half he can't because statute, he can only use the revenues that are currently in statute, right? So he's going to have to put forth a budget next year that is going to look at about a $2.7 billion reduction in revenues from this current year right now. It's going to be very interesting. I don't know what he's going to do. Somebody said, well, maybe he'll just introduce a 6-month budget. Well, he can't. The Constitution says that you have to do a full year's budget, right? So that discussion is going to be very interesting. And the other thing I think we're going to see is obviously we have a governor's race we're in the middle of right now, and what's going to happen with the income tax and the income tax increase that was passed recently and the sunset of it, I think is going to be front and center in that discussion as well. A couple other things just to touch on quickly, and Kim mentioned it, there is a couple of minimum wage bills that have been introduced in Springfield. Hasn't been much discussion on it since we adjourned in May, but they're still out there, they're still active, and certainly those individuals that are pushing for it are still pushing for it. I have said that I do not support that proposal at this time. I think, the state of Illinois, we're really struggling with some really high unemployment numbers. And it's really frustrating for me that we're kind of fortunate in this area. We aren't faced with that, but if you look at the entire state numbers, we're still too high. And, I think part of that could be, I just don't think the timing is right to be looking at an increase in the minimum wage. I've told the supporters of it, they know where I stand on that issue, and that's where I stand today on that issue. So with that, that okay, Mike? We'll open it and leave it open for questions later on. Thank you.
Thanks, John. No question. A lot of difficult decisions to make. Speaking of a governor's race, it's nice that you could take some time out of your run around, but Jill Tracy.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate being asked to join you all for lunch. It's always nice it's a pretty drive out to Spring Lake, and I always enjoy it in the fall. And I am glad to be with you because I do learn from each of you. Since I've been in the House for the last 7 years, I've worked on issues that you've brought to my attention. And I learn more every time I talk with you about the challenges you have. I look at the spectrum of businesses that we have here, from my favorite yogurt to my window guys, but you all have a common ground of the challenges to do business in Illinois. And we want to hear from you because sometimes there's not things that we will know about in your challenges to do business in Illinois. I know that from my own personal experience, my son, who does business in Denver and runs 10 Meineke franchises with my nephew there, they decided to operate this Meineke franchise in Quincy. And I said, well, watch out. It's going to be a little difficult. He says, I can't believe this. You can't get a taxpayer ID easily. You can't get going easily. And then workman's comp is higher. Unemployment insurance rates are higher. And now with this health insurance obstacle, it is a major challenge. And he said, I've never had to have a representative intervene for me to help me with an agency. But in Illinois, you do. And that just highlights what I have known. And I said, well, watch out. If you get in trouble with the Department of Revenue, you are going to get socked big time. You know, it's just, and those are the challenges I know you face every day, and it's not funny. So since I've been in the House, I've worked on tort reform. I think our litigious nature of lawsuit abuse in Illinois has run rampant. We're known as a judicial hellhole. That's gotten somewhat better, but we can still look at Madison and St. Clair and Cook County. Their dockets are the bestest litigation from all over the United States. Those are the things we work on. I work on in the Judiciary Committee and the like, and we'll continue to work on, because I do think it's a black eye for Illinois when you pick up a business magazine in your trade and it points to litigation problems, and an employer has to think about that when they're wanting to move in or expand in Illinois. Another thing I've been working on and will continue to work on tirelessly is workman's compensation reform. We know all too well that causation is the driver of the cost of rates for workman's compensation. We can look at the reforms that were done in Missouri, and they have yielded good benefits. I did not support the last workman's compensation reform because I did not believe it was truly reform, and I think that the figures have borne that out. Unemployment insurance rates. I hear that all the time, even though I don't have a claim on unemployment insurance. My rates are still going high. In Labor Committee, we fight that tooth and nail to try to get concessions for startup businesses, you know, whenever they get their rate that on a new business. That starting out is the toughest time, is to get your costs down, and we haven't gained any ground on that yet, but I'm going to keep still fighting for that. I know that it can be done. I introduced a bill that it's criminal fraud if you knowingly get unemployment insurance when you know you're not deserving of it. That's didn't get me very far, but I'm going to keep trying, because it's too easy to go online and avail yourselves of unemployment insurance. And I am glad to say that the new director of unemployment, I have seen a major movement, and the dollars have shown that they are cracking down on the numbers of people that are getting unemployment that are not deserving of it. Because the sad thing is there are many people who need those benefits deservedly, and they're not going to be able to get them easily because of the fraud and the misuse. And it makes your rates go up. Permits and regulation. The agencies in this state, you know, talking about a governor's race, one of the things we've got to do is get our state agencies working better. They are short-staffed in many areas. They have too many chiefs, and the lower staff to do the work is lacking, and the morale is extremely low, and the caseloads are high, and as a result, we spend in my legislative office, and I know John's office assists us very much as well, every day putting out fires of whether it be a public health permit, whether it be a EPA permit, whether it be a FOID card that's lost, or the concealed carry permits, or just on and on and on. Every day, that's what we do. It didn't used to be this way. Didn't used to be this way. Professional regulation covers so many things, from banking to lawyers to nurse degrees to tattoo artists to all this. And what's sad is when someone moves here from Missouri and they can't get their nursing license, or they can't get their medical license, or they move here from Florida and they've got established residency that's 6 months before they can get their medical license to practice in Illinois. That's wrong, and it's got to be changed. We've got to get these agencies working again properly as they should be. Talking about the income tax increase, it's very concerning as to, we always say one thing in life is certain: you cannot avoid death or taxes. Well, that's federal taxes, not state taxes, because people in Illinois, if they can, are going to move out of this state to avoid taxes. If we look at where the economy has thrived, it's the places where the tax rates are lower, like Texas. And that's the kind of economic drivers we need in Illinois, is policies in place that are going to encourage business growth, encourage business expansion. And we have only to look over in Iowa to that fertilizer plant that located across the river, not because we didn't try to offer incentives, but the fact that the black cloud of our finances has hurt the state. One, I think the judicial environment, or the tort reform I mentioned, the unfunded pension being the largest in the nation, our corruption, last two governors being in prison, that has hurt. It's a black eye to businesses. And this guy that did that fertilizer plant, he's an Illinois citizen. He went to U of I, but he chose Iowa because he felt it was a healthier state to do business in. And that's something we're going to keep working on, and we have to change. So that brings us to to the pension plan. And I wanted to mention prevailing wage and the opportunities to expand it have just got to stop. It seems like every year in Labor Committee in the House, I sit on that as a spokesperson for the minority party, and we hear over and over from counties, from cities, testifying saying, give us some relief. The townships and the like, they can't get projects finished. They can't fix a furnace in a school easily. They have to go outside of their local region to hire somebody. And plus, I mean, they have to wait because they can't afford it, because when they run the prevailing wage things, it's more expensive, about 30% more expensive. And so to me, it's much like minimum wage. It stifles jobs rather than expands them. And to see the way that they want to expand prevailing wage in enterprise zones and the like, or to projects that have any part of public money in them, is just, it just stifles the economy by hampering the ability to expand and do jobs, and the cost goes up when it is done. And so we're ever vigilant to try to hinder that. I always ask, well, how in the world do you calculate those prevailing wage rates? I've never met anybody that's making those wages in my area. And, they justify, and they've got this jargon but it's something I ask, and I'll continue to ask because it doesn't make sense to me. Pensions. Well, yes, we have met all summer. I've been in Chicago a lot more than I ever cared to. And I wish I had my concealed carry permit sometimes when I'm up there, because I think it's kind of dangerous up there after dark. But when we first started meeting, this committee of 10, we had two public hearings, one in Chicago, one in Springfield, and we tried to get off the two plans John mentioned. We note that we had a loggerjam between the two plans, and so we tried to go off the chart there and develop new plans. And there's different components. First of all, you've got your age of retirement, you've got your years of service, you've got COLAs, cost of living adjustments, which started out, well, they didn't start in early retirement years, but then it was 2% simple, and then it was a 3% simple, and then later on, not all too long ago, it became 3% compounded. And if you look at the number of public employees and teachers retired, that is the major driver of the cost, is this cost of living compounded 3%. So that has been a struggle. We looked at different components, thinking that if you were going to develop a COLA and tie it to the cost of living, maybe that would be more accurate, because we saw that a 3% compounding was certainly higher than what rates of CDs or your interest rates are on most investments. So we offered some plans, and right now it's really up to meetings of the 4 caucus leaders to see where we're going on this. And Speaker Madigan has made it clear he wants to see major cost savings. If you look at the Illinois general revenue budget, 40% is in Medicaid. Now, I think that's too much, and I think it's going to grow because we added another part of the population, about 250,000 in Cook County, onto those rolls. Not so long ago, maybe last year or so. And we haven't seen the savings that we were supposed to see from the SMART Act reforms, which were Medicaid reforms where we scrubbed the rolls and the like. We haven't gotten as far along on that as we wanted to. So either it's going to be 40% or maybe perhaps a little bit more this next year. What we're trying, and the public pensions are 20% of our budget. So what we're trying to do is get below that 20% so that we have more than 40% left to fund the other services that the state's engaged in: public utility, public education, public safety, all the other services of the state. So 40% of your state budget for those type of services is not much. And Madigan wants to see that we get the pension payment below that 20% next year. Well, problem is because we're so slow in getting this pension reform done, it won't help next year's budget much to speak of, because we just won't yield the savings. But, I mean, it's a huge challenge. We have to make it, our goal is to make it solvent sustainable. It's the largest unfunded, $100 billion or more unfunded pension liability, the largest in the nation. But we have very stiff, strong constitutional language. So to get a bill that's going to pass the House, the Senate, be signed by the governor, and pass the courts and be held constitutional is truly a challenge. So they look at those different components, and like I say, you know, benefits can't be diminished. Well, courts have ruled that health insurance benefits are not part of those benefits that can't be protected. We've already had that lawsuit where there was 80% of our retirees were getting free health care for life, and it was going to go broke. It wasn't able to exist any longer, and so rather than cause it to cease totally being offered, we said you're going to have premiums and based on your years of service and income at retirement. So that was so is the COLA protected benefit? I think not totally, because, as I said, it's changed over the years from a 2% simple to a 3% compounded. My retired school mother, or school teacher mother, said not too long ago, you know, that 3% compounded stuff, that really adds up. You know, in the end, you find out you're making more than you did when you were teaching. And, you know, granted, she never made a high salary as a teacher. No teacher did. Most teachers did not. So she could see that, and as we know, the idea that people are living longer. And so the age, I think, needs to be changed and phased in. We recognize that. 55, it's 50 for state troopers under an alternative formula, and DOC workers and the like. So age, and most importantly, through all this, I think we have to learn from the mistakes of our past and guarantee the payment, whatever it is. If it's 20%, you have to bite that bullet and make it, because you can't unfund these pensions any longer. I think we've got to learn from the mistakes of the past and recognize that people are going to have to put more in because they're going to live longer, and that's a good thing. So the restructuring of this and getting the actuarials on the components has taken a long time, because every time you change one of the components, it has to be studied again and getting the cost savings factor. So I don't know where this is going. It's the longer it goes, the bigger it gets, and the harder it is to tackle. So we'll continue to tackle it. I know there is behind the scenes work being done by probably President Cullerton and Speaker Madigan, and Chris Radonio, who's the minority leader of the Senate, and Jim Durkin now is the minority leader of the House. And we'll continue to do that, and until we do, it's going to be this dark cloud hanging over Illinois and causing our bond ratings to go down, hopefully not much more, and hurting our ability to have a decent state budget to fund the other state services. I brought today, you know, we're talking about taxes and progressive taxes and the ending of the tax thing. I brought today an analysis of the one progressive tax bill that's put in. And as I said, you can't avoid death or federal taxes, but you can avoid state taxes. You can just leave the state. And that's what I've always said will happen if we keep raising taxes against people in Illinois, is if they can, they're going to move. But just for an example, we're going to go to a 3.75% when it sunsets, and there's talk that if it sunsets. But it will definitely sunset. There'll have to be a bill to extend it or something if it's going to stay in. And that brought in about $7 billion. And people say all the time, I was willing to pay more, but I wanted to see some results. I wanted to see the pensions be paid down, or the $9 billion, or now it's about $7-8 billion, depending on what day, or of unpaid bills. I wanted to see some progress made. And I haven't seen it. Where did that money go? Well, it got in the dark holes, I guess, but it was used for something somewhere, but we didn't see it as a big impact like we needed it. But anyway, so it's going to supposedly go down to 3.75 in 2015. If you look at an income range under this bill that Representative Jacobson's filed, 0 to 18,000 per year, you're going to pay 3%. 18,000 to 36,000, you're going to pay 4%. 36,000 to 58,000, you're going to pay 5%. That's where we are right now. I submit to you that's your middle class. That's your low middle class, depending on how many dependents. 58,000 to 95,000, you're going to go to 6%. 95,000 to 196,000, you're going to go to 7%. 196,000 to 500,000, 8%. Above 500,000, 9%. Do you think those people making 500,000 are going to be living in Illinois? Probably not. But and there's not that many of them. So maybe it doesn't matter. But for the ones that it's going to impact, it's going to be the people at home with the families to raise that are struggling to make ends meet, and they're going to wonder, what in the world did we do? What is my state trying to do to me? I'm just trying to raise my family and live in Illinois, a state I love, and why do they keep taking our money and we don't see any progress? So anyway, that's our challenge, and John and I will continue to work very hard on that. And so perhaps we just open it up to questions and for John and I. Anyway, thank you.
We do want to open it up for questions, and I know one of the things that some of us might want to hear a little bit more about is just some of the thinking behind, at least I know for me and my business, is the thinking behind what's going to happen if the minimum wage goes up. That's one of the things that just drives me crazy as a business owner is when they start talking about that $10 an hour minimum wage, sure, there's that argument about, well, people need to have that kind of money. But I just know for me who do use part-timers, I'm down to my lowest number I can afford now. And I just think about what it's going to be like at 10 or 1060, whatever it is. So maybe from the House side, maybe from the Senate side, John, maybe you can explain a little bit, because I know a lot of it's coming from both sides. But, what's some of the rationale do you hear from, your colleagues over there?
So Senator Lightford has a bill in the Senate. I assume there's a bill in the House as well. Who's filed that bill? Art Turner, Representative Turner. So, Senator Lightford lives in the city of Chicago. Nice lady, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of hotel workers and individuals that work in the service industry, and that's kind of who she's representing. Now, when I talk to her, I tell her about the impact that's going to have mostly on small businesses. That's the folks that bulk of my constituents. And when I talk to the small business owners about the impact that's going to have, again, like I said earlier, that's why I've been have not supported that piece of legislation. So, but it's really hard sometimes to get that message across. I have a little local diner in Rushville that I like to go to. Get a cup of coffee, and every time I go in there, almost, they ask, well, what's happening with the minimum wage? Because that's really going to impact their bottom line. And so, and of course, we here in this area, especially with right across from the river from Missouri and Iowa, that disparity is already in existence, and so that makes it even tougher for us. So those are some of the things that I try to explain to my colleagues on that are pushing for it.
Well, as I travel the state in this new role I have running for lieutenant governor, I visit in a lot of small communities, and it was amazing to me to talk with people. That always came up is, what about minimum wage? And you would say, well, that was, if you look at the history of minimum wage, it was never meant to be a living wage. It's never meant to support a family. It's an entry-level position. You will hurt teens getting jobs. You will hurt the whole spectrum of employment. It'll drive up consumer costs. It's just bad economics in so many ways. But then when a newspaper reporter says, yeah, but I've got 2 kids in school, and that's all I'm getting, and how am I going to make it? And I say, well, my position is we got to have better jobs in Illinois. We've got to have an economic driver in this state that has a positive business climate, and that does take a while. And it's hard for somebody that's struggling to understand that, but it was amazing how I ran into it over and over, and I didn't know that I was ever getting my message across clearly for somebody that is on minimum wage. And don't get me wrong, it is a job killer. I am firmly against it, but I do see, and especially in Chicago, when these groups come down and they're working in restaurants, they see no light at the end of the tunnel to ever change jobs. They're a single parent, and it just is very disheartening that that's the end of the line for them. But it shouldn't be that way, and you try to say, that's not the type of job I think you should have to support a family on. But I do see it's kind of the have and have-nots argument, and it's so I see a lot of people in the workforce that have never been around the small roofer or the small car wash operator or the small business person that sits home at night on the kitchen table and tallies up what it's costing him to do business, or how they're going to add an employee or cut an employee or meet payroll. So that is something very disconcerting to me, is I see a lot of people think that's their only avenue. And when I saw the governor come out on Labor Day and say that's like a major priority of his, it really, if that's where we want to see this economy go in Illinois, it's sad, because that is not how we're going to get out of this slump that we have in our economy. So that it was interesting that kept coming up over and over.
Regarding the minimum wage, it's just our take on it that, well, a couple things. If you take minimum wage up to that point, our employees who have earned raises up to $11 or $12 an hour, that's an instant demotion handed to them by the state.
Absolutely.
Now there's not as much, they don't feel like they've gained much, okay? The second thing is that's really lacking, in the United States in general, really, is a work ethic. And the amount of benefits that are given to Illinois people who, and many of them need it, but it's so high that there's an overlap of how much they can earn versus how much benefit. It doesn't benefit them to go to work. So I know it's a tough thing to do, to cut benefits to those people, but it's going to incentivize them, and it's going to give them some work ethic and give them a reason to want to go and improve their situation. And that's just a take. It's not a question, it's just a take.
One of the bills I had last year was, and I got pounded on it quite a bit, was if you're taking unemployment benefits, the idea was to get you into a community service of 20 hours per week, recognizing that you get stagnant and stale sitting at home. You need to network, and you need to feel worth something community-wise. And they've done it in other states successfully. But to kind of curb that thing of you got to sit back, because the one thing about that's what federal unemployment structured is you can't take a part-time job. You're kind of hemmed in from not being able to do part-time employment, because you'll jeopardize your ability to take in your benefits. So you're right. It is a.
Well, that situation also incentivizes people to work for cash. That's done a lot. People on unemployment constantly asking about working for cash. Well, that's showing us on tax revenues as well.
That's right.
John, you made the remark about your colleague representing service personnel in hotels and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you should point out to her that if the minimum wage gets raised and the roommates get $10 an hour and things of that nature, the hotel room costs in Chicago are going to go up to over $200. So who's going to go stay in a hotel? I mean, we're not going to be able to go to Chicago anymore with our wages that we have here, when $139 or $150 is stretching it. then the hotels are going to close, and then where are they going to be?
Yeah, and that's actually a great point, and something I think they understand that. I really do. Well, I know you're shaking your head no, but I don't. I think they understand it. They understand that cost it has to be transferred on. I mean, it's going to whatever the good or product or service that company or business is providing. They're going to incur additional cost. It has to be absorbed somewhere, right? So they're more than likely going to pass it on to the customer. So I think they understand that. I just, again, I think that they're looking only at it from one angle, and that's the perspective of the employee, which that's not a bad thing to look at, but I think we need to look at both ends, both sides of that. Of the repercussions of what those moves do, and certainly we've talked about that. I've done it from more on a local small business standpoint. That's when I have conversations with my colleagues about that. Is that we have so many of these small businesses that are struggling right now, and if they have to increase their cost of doing business, that's going to even make it more difficult. So those are your point's absolutely right on.
Because the business owners will just go to them and shut out and everything too,
Right.
Because I mean, we're not made of money.
Yes.
Jill, you were talking a little bit about Medicaid and the things that we already know that would be, expanding that. We haven't really talked a little bit about the Obamacare, and is there any predictors at this point for the state of Illinois as to how much of an expansion based on that? Because if the changes start working and people actually start getting in there, and I mean, there's going to be looks like a huge impact on people who are actually going to automatically qualify for Medicaid that have never been on the roll. Is there any idea of how that's, what they think?
No, I agree. And I remember when our director of insurance, Mark McGrath, whenever Obamacare passed, he met with us to explain how much more it was going to cost us in Medicaid. And then he left the state, went out to Washington to implement the program. So I was baffled by how he thought we were going to afford this. And so no, and that's why, to get you can see why the public pension annuitant is so aggravated looking at that Medicaid thing being so looming out there and wishing that we were more frugal with our money in that realm so that we could fund their pensions more.
I haven't heard any numbers. Obviously, the Obamacare cost is being incurred by the federal government, so it's not a state cost. So it doesn't have a direct impact on our budget except for perhaps personnel and implementing the program. But as far as the cost itself, the states aren't going to be bearing that cost, at least in the near future. Yeah, down the road, we don't know. It's like the Medicaid expansion proposal. The federal government's going to cover that for 3 years. For the first 3 years, 100%, and then 90-some% the next 2 years, and after that, we're going to have to make some decisions. Yeah. Absolutely.
But then again, who is the government? I mean, we are.
Right.
Our taxes pay for all these programs out there. So if the federal government isn't concerned about it and the state government isn't concerned about it, we're still concerned about it.
Yeah. But the question was, as far as our state budget's impacted, I mean, yes, we're definitely all impacted by those decisions. Yeah. Other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah, that's a great point. And even to kind of Craig's point earlier, you said about it's not just those individuals that get the minimum wage. Everybody else up the pay scale, right, is in theory going to be impacted. So if those individuals that are making 11 or 12 or whatever an hour, if they see the minimum wage workers go up, they're going to like, well, my wage ought to go up as well. So, and this is something that I've heard over and over again from from especially, again, the small business owners. It's not just that worker, it's the ripple effect. On one hand, you can say that's a good thing. They're going to be receiving more money. That's more money that they can spend in the economy and so on and so forth. But the bottom line is that cost is still going to be transferred. Somebody's got to absorb that, or they're going to be passed on in goods and services. So that's a real issue.
I would just note it presumes that everything's going to stay equal, and it's not, because you know that the cost of the hamburger has to go up, the cost of whatever. Over Missouri, it's not. So it just drives the person to over there. I was looking at the revenues of the state here recently, and they talked about how we haven't yielded the money that we thought we would in the sin taxes that we put on alcohol or cigarettes and the like, because as we know, they just went across the river. And so that's what happens when you increase taxes, is you just encourage growth somewhere else.
John, I'm pretty sure I know Jill's answer. What's your specific position on the progressive tax and the future of the 5% now?
The future of the current income tax, I think, is going to be contingent on what happens with pensions. In other words, there's Senate Bill 1 versus Senate Bill 2404. Senate Bill 1 reduces the pension payment about $1.8 billion annually. So it would reduce that pension, an annual pension payment that's right now $6 billion. It would reduce it by 1.8, maybe not next year, but I think the following year. Senate Bill 2404, I think, reduces it about $800 million. So depending on what happens with the pension solution, whatever that resolution is, and what kind of an impact that has on the payment schedule moving forward, I think it's going to be a big part of the whole income tax discussion. Whether it, as Jill said, it does sunset. The only way it's going to be extended if there's a bill introduced to extend it at some different rate. To the question of the progressive tax, I've said for several times that the only way that we can go from a flat tax to a progressive tax is a change to the Constitution, and that would have to be a vote put up there would have to be a vote by the populace in the state of Illinois. I would support putting that on the ballot and let the people decide whether they want a flat tax or a progressive tax. The bill that Jill was referring to, Representative Jacobson's bill, was that, I mean, we can't just introduce a bill to change that. I mean, it would take a change to the Constitution. Was hers tied to that?
It must be, you're right.
Yeah.
Must be. Yeah.
So it was in the event of a change to the Constitution, that's,
It's a language that would go on the ballot.
oh, with the rates on it.
I haven't seen the one with the rates. I
Yeah.
saw two permanent.
I see, yeah.
But your specific position, let's say the Constitution allows you to do whatever you want with taxes. What's your position on what should happen to the tax rate?
Oh, I don't know. You know, Iowa has a progressive tax. I think their rates are similar to what Jill was talking to. I know that in Iowa, if you make $50,000 or more, I think you pay about between 8 and 9% on your income tax. So I don't know. I have not certainly looked at what the different rates should be, and you know, Representative Jacobson has those rates. I have no idea if that's something that I would support.
I guess my concern is that if you do something with pension, I don't care what politician it is, whether it's Illinois, federal, you're not wanting to give up any more revenue. Say we still have these $7 billion debt load to pay, or we need to. I mean, even with my understanding is the budget spending went up this year, correct?
Yeah.
Even when we're talking about all these issues, and you still increase budget spending. I mean, somebody's got to take some leadership there and just says, look, we just cannot. I mean, we can't do it at home. We can't do it in business. I mean,
Well, $1 billion of that new spending went because we have $1 billion additional that we had to pay into the retirement system. So spending went up that much, right? So, I mean, you have those types of pressures on the budget that we have to address before we can. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, look, I really appreciate your position. I understand, but if you have $1 billion at home, if your utility bill goes up, your electric bill goes up, and your water bill goes up, then I don't go to the movies as much. I don't go out to eat as much. I give up something to have to cover those bills, and I think that's the frustration.
And one comment I wanted to make about this backlog of unpaid bills, it's actually about $5 billion, which is still too high, don't get me wrong, but of that $5 billion, half of that is only, and I hate to use that term, but it's 60 days and newer and behind. So we have cut down this backlog of unpaid bills has been cut down tremendously, and that's where again some of that revenue the new revenues coming in is going to pay those bills, and that's been factored into each of the last 2 years' budgets as well.
I had a question about the pension with Tracy. On the committee, looking backwards and the jam we're in now, is the majority of the unfunded liability from our years where we didn't make the proper payments, or is it for the mechanism how we develop the pensions over time? I'm just wondering where the biggest load of that came from.
Well, in 96, there was the 96 ramp, and it was backloaded, and if you look at it. But to me, if you look at the graphs, it really got off when Blagojevich became governor, and in 2003,
So one steady payments, it was
is about, yeah. And that's what concerns me about some of the bills we've been studying in the pension committee, is if we backload them, we're just really not dealing with a problem right now structurally. So, and then can you make that payment? I think you've got to lock in and say whatever the payment is, and I think that helps with the constitutionality of it, because that is consideration, is that whatever it is, we make it. And that's why I very strongly think to make it solvent, sustainable, and stable, and bring back some credibility to our fiscal health and maybe help our bond ratings, is that we know we've got a plan to pay these pensions. 96 was the ramp, and it did go up high, and it's been difficult because it really got, as John said, it was growing tremendously. The recession hit. It was just a perfect storm of bad circumstances. The bonding that was done in 06, and instead of making the payment, we borrowed. And another part I should mention is that I've advocated for is we do have bonds coming due on the pension payment that we borrowed for in 06 and maybe 07 or 08. So it expires in 2019. And so our idea was do a bond stabilization plan, that money be reserved, not considered part of GRF, go into a stabilization fund and go towards the unfunded pension liability. There again, I think helping consideration and bolster the constitutionality of this restructure. And it makes good sense. You know, a lot of people, public annuitants, whether you agree or not, they feel like they put in their part and the state didn't put their, and that this is all on their back. Well, those bonds are taxpayer money across the board. And some, you know, in the annuity systems will say, well, I'm a public taxpayer too. Well, yes, but overall, all of us will be hit again with those bonds.
And Greg, I think your question was what percent was caused by this and what percent was. It's my understanding about 40-some% of the situation that we're in, 40% of it is based on not making payments into the systems. And again, that's been going on for decades, okay, number one. I think around 20-some%, I think it's 26% is because of benefits that have been increased over the years. And another 20-some% is based on market investments or bad investments in the market and turned down in the markets. And I don't know what the rest of it is because that doesn't add up to 100%, but that's the bulk of it. That's kind of the breakdown. Yes, John.
I heard both of you say that the benefit schedule for the pensions was written in stone by the Constitution.
So the Constitution says that benefits cannot be diminished, and that's a generalization, but basically our Constitution says that benefits cannot be diminished. That's correct. It can be increased, it can't be decreased. That's exactly right, John. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure. You know, the people that are under the annuitants right now, it was 2% or less whenever they started in simple, and then it went up. So I mean that factor changed, and the ruling in the health insurance thing said that because health insurance benefits, you can't quantify them. They change. They fluctuate, then that's not a benefit that is guaranteed. We've looked at a lot of the cases in other states. I mean, certainly other states are dealing with this, Arizona and the like, and that's why we're struggling with the idea of consideration, contract law of consideration, going into this, and each side giving and taking a little bit.
And John, the term benefits is kind of a vague term. What's that mean? What does that mean? Health benefits? Does that mean retirement benefits, so the Constitution is not clear on that. It says benefits cannot be diminished. So that's a vague term. And
To let my constituents know, the counties of the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, it is funded at 85%. No problemo.
And in all fairness, John, you can tax for that, right? Right?
This changes course, but can you talk a little bit about the apprentice program thing that's coming back into play again, I guess, on the bill, or being talked about with prevailing wage jobs?
And Kim referred to it briefly, and it's been a while since I looked at it. It was a bill that was in place last spring. It did not move forward. It did pass the House. I think 60 votes. It barely got out of the House. It was not called for a vote. Didn't get out of committee in the Senate. But it's my understanding that there is some renewed interest in trying to push it. So is it Todd? Yeah. I honestly have to take a look at it. I asked Kim as we were having lunch here, I need some more information. I have been lobbied on it in support of it, and it's a responsible bidder is what they refer to it as, and I have to get some more information on it. I just can't speak to it, but there is another push to try to get it through, and Kim said possibly even during the second week of veto.
Thanks for bringing that up. I was unaware, and I mean, I didn't support it. Right, okay,
You were no.
right.
It's just, I mean, not all trades have representation in unions and in the area, you know, so if they tie that together on top of expanding prevailing wage, Chaddock's in the court system right now, Department of Labor wants them to do all prevailing wage work, so if all of a sudden that is true, and the courts deem that that's correct, if Chaddock wants their bushes trimmed around their building, they've got to call a union landscaper that's got an apprentice program somewhere up north out of Peoria, Chicago, somewhere to come down, and it's not feasible in all trades across all walks of life. So,
And it costs more.
yeah, it's going to cost a lot.
Pat even brought up another issue with that, so
You know,
on
and
the engineering side of it.
Chaddock quantified how much minimum wage was going to impact their business or their ability, and it's staggering, staggering.
Question.
Several of us attended when there was a gentleman here in Quincy on the progressive tax several weeks ago. He keeps referring to it as a fair tax. Well, it's not, in our eyes, a fair tax. Is there any way, or is anyone presenting anything that's similar on consumption, like the HR 25 is federally for fair tax that they're working on consumption? Missouri almost made that several years ago, maybe something happened. A second question is there anywhere on fraudulent activity that drug testing could be randomly done? Not that they plan to have this.
It's my understanding that some states have done the random drug testing, and the courts have knocked it down in every occasion. I don't think there's a state that's doing it right now that I'm aware of. Yeah. So to your first question, I don't know. I don't think so. I've not heard any discussion about that kind of a proposal. Have you, Jill? Are you aware of that?
In the House, we filed a bill fairly regularly, wanted to put on the link card photo ID and to cut the fraud and abuse, but not discriminate against the person who's receiving benefits, but it is public money, and to drug tests, the eligibility or randomly, to structure it as constitutionally as you can, because it's, once again, it is public benefits, and you need to deter someone into a proper treatment rather than enabling.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.